This is your host, producer, and engineer, Roy of Hollywood, welcoming you again to Something's Happening. And we'll be here till 6 a.m. with Dynamite Radio for Night People. I managed to get for a live session on Something's Happening, Summer Reese, who is the executive director of Pacifica. That is nationally. She's the numero uno person taking over this job. And I didn't know if she would be interested or willing to come on the show and talk, especially at midnight. But she said she'd love to come on. We've heard Summer on pitching with me, but then she was just a lowly board member, and then of course she's been a lowly volunteer, and so mixing with us lowly programmers. But now she's the executive director of Pacifica, and we're going to find out the skinny. This is a super report to the listener, KPFK Los Angeles. Okay, well, we have
Hi,
somebody.
Roy.
Hi, Summer.
Good to be here.
I'm very glad that you're able to pull it off. First of all, being in town, you're in charge. You're the executive director of all 5 Pacifica stations, only one of which is in Los Angeles.
That's true. And the PRA unit and the national office and officially 7 units plus our affiliates.
And that's Berkeley, Washington, New York, and Houston.
That's right.
And Los Angeles, of course.
This is my home station, though.
How did you secretly muscle your way into the position of executive director of Pacifica?
I'd like to think that I have worked extraordinarily hard over the last 6 years serving on the local station board, 4 years on the national board, 3 years as the chair of the national board. I think I'm one of the longest reelected chairs of the National Board of Pacifica, and I have significant business experience and legal experience and things which are applicable in our highly regulated industry. And I've been elected and selected over and over again to positions of some responsibility within the organization, and finally to the executive director after being the interim executive director for a year and a half.
But I hear you've been posing as a lawyer when you're not a lawyer.
That is one of the most ludicrous things that has gone around lately. My very good friend, a personal friend, Lawrence Teeter, was Sirhan's attorney for 10 years. And when my friend Larry passed away in 2005, he designated me to wrap up his legal practice, including seeing to it that I found a new attorney for Sirhan and made sure that the very voluminous habeas corpus case, which Larry had on file in federal court, was continued and, did not cease to exist as a legal case because he had passed away. And so for the next, about 5 years, I worked on the case. I was able to bring William Pepper on board as an attorney, and Lori
We heard
Dusick.
him on my show last week.
I'll bet you did. He's probably an MLK case.
The MLK case,
Sure.
Martin Luther King case, which is a conspiracy theory, even though it was in a court of law, in a courtroom with judge and jury. Some people refer to the Martin Luther King case as a conspiracy theory.
Well, I'm afraid some people will refer to everything as a conspiracy theory if it doesn't conform neatly with the government line on what occurred in an assassination. And in the Sirhan case, I coordinated all of the, there was a lot of media attention around the 40th anniversary of the case. People were writing books and doing films, and I coordinated all of the various press contacts and handled all of the federal filings for the next several years. I'm the person who filed everything for William Pepper and Lori Dusick. And I think this thing erroneously accusing me of being an attorney, I've never claimed to be an attorney in any article or any presentation. A photographer put attorney underneath my photograph in one article, and then someone else picked that up on the internet. I can't really control that. If you read the body of the article, it's quite clear that I'm not an attorney. So. But alas, I'm afraid misinformation knows no bounds, and the truth does not have sway with people who are not amenable to it.
Well, to some people, free speech means the ability to lie your ass off.
It's after midnight. Okay. And besides, that is a donkey, right?
Yes, your donkey.
Any other myths we'd like to bust tonight, Roy, besides my not being an attorney?
There's going to be a lot that we're going to hear. But let me see. I understand that you and in some cases you and Gary Null are going to do all the programming, and all the public affairs shows are going to be canceled, and in their place is going to be all conspiracy theory shows and new age weirdos.
Well, as a seasoned political activist, I find some of that kind of ludicrous. Also, I've been responsible for taking our well-produced California programming and putting it on our New York and Washington, D.C. stations. I'm the person who put Letters in Politics and Sojourner Truth on in Washington, D.C., Letters in Politics, Sojourner Truth, and Ian Masters on in New York. So the idea that I've had to reassure certain public affairs hosts that the rumor being circulated by certain people that suddenly public affairs were going to be wiped from the schedule was completely false. And then I was surprised some of them were even giving it a moment's consideration, since I clearly support that spectrum of our programming very strongly. And the idea that we would put all of anything on. I mean, I think what's one of the unfortunate things that goes on in Pacifica is that so many people feel that if someone else is on the air with whom they do not agree, that that person should be vanquished from our environment. And what's clear about the Pacifica mission statement is it is a broad statement which encompasses room for many, many viewpoints that do not agree with each other. It's right in the mission statement to bring together people from different backgrounds to discuss the reasons that we have all these antagonisms, not to create the antagonisms. And unfortunately, I feel that the mission statement's been somewhat set on its head by certain individuals that think their job is to create internal warfare and strife rather than fulfill what Lou Hill intended, was that people come and dialogue and debate on important issues and share their thoughts. And then, of course, you have the entire cultural component, which is another, the other half of the mission statement. So, and you're one of the people that honors that part of the mission statement as well. So,
what's your prognosis for Pacifica, and what is your prognosis for KPFK?
Well, guarded but optimistic, or is that optimistic but guarded? I think that we have many structural issues to address, and that's what I've been doing since I became the IED in, when was that? Was it already 2012? Holy cow. Okay. I believe that we have still tremendous difficulties on the East Coast in New York and D.C. Of a profound nature. I've reduced fixed operating costs in New York by $1 million in 1 year, which is a tremendous amount of money to reduce in expenses in such a short period of time. But and that has helped to stabilize that station. And I think Pacifica can survive and continue and improve dramatically, but it takes a significant rising above all of the internal strife for people to actually focus on what is important about a alternative media organization surviving in a difficult economic environment, and one in which media consolidation is rather voracious, and in which commercial operators would very much like our high quality, large signals in the best markets. I think KPFK is in a very good position to improve where it's at right now, but at the moment, none of the stations are where they need to be. All 5 of our stations, we occupy such a low percentage of the overall listenership in our respective markets that we're barely on the radar. We're talking, 1/10 of 1% of the available listenership, sometimes 1/3 of 1%. Our listenership at KPFK and the revenue generated is so low for the size of our market. This is the number 2 radio market in the country, that we are being phased out of CPB funding specifically for those reasons. And they
don't recognize us as a real
We
station.
simply fail to meet the criteria for listenership and audience support. We don't raise enough revenue. We don't have enough people listening to meet their criteria to warrant support any longer under what they call their community service grant program, and so we're being phased out of that program. That's that's hundreds of thousands of dollars per year for each station. It's a situation that can be turned around This doesn't have to happen, and there's still time to do that. But this is a situation that's been going on. This happens over a course of several years that CPB phases you out. And we're now on, I believe, our second to last year. It'll be phased out by 2015. To turn that around, you have to strategically address programming and its placement and what day parts you put it in so that you are generating sufficient audience in primetime hours, doing significant community outreach and promotions, things that have not been sufficiently focused upon throughout the network, and increasing that listenership and the listener support. And then we'll retain our CPB funds as well as being in a much better place because, quite frankly, although New York and D.C. are in a much more difficult position, the two California stations and the Houston station all operate at the very edges of their margins with no excess, no reserves, no extra month of operating capital. So we are always living paycheck to paycheck. And that's even after we have, $1 million fund drive, which is sort of, it's appalling on some levels, but that's where we're at. And those dynamics have to change. We have to not be offering 600 premiums in a fund drive. I mean, some of these things they're dysfunctional. And that's a big part of my job is, people are focused exclusively on programming, but so much of what has to be addressed within Pacifica are structural, organizational, and administrative functions that have to be handled appropriately. Regulatory compliance. I appointed a CPB compliance officer because we were audited by the CPB for the tax years 2009 and 2010, and they found us wanting in many different ways, including our compliance with the Communications Act. And we're now near perfect, and I'm feeling much better about that. And I'm doing that with every other area of regulatory compliance because we are a highly regulated industry. We're regulated as broadcasters. We're regulated as a nonprofit organization. And so our existence depends upon strict legal compliance. And so that's a lot of what I'm addressing myself to. And the functionality, administrative functionality, cooperation between the stations, working as a network. We have the ability to work as a network. We have 170 affiliate stations that take programming from us. So we're extraordinarily vital and important in the community radio world in terms of providing quality alternative programming content. And we can maximize that. I mean, that's some of what I've done over this last year, dealing with things like having to make dramatic layoffs in New York. 2/3 of the staff were laid off all at once. Every paid programmer in New York was laid off. I had no choice to do that. They could not make their payroll. What did that mean? I had to source decently produced programming from within the network that we are already paying to produce. So I took shows from California that we already pay to produce. We're incurring production costs. They're decent quality shows. And they're of national content. They cover things which are applicable in different signal areas. So you take the best of what you do and you put it on your other stations. And that's just intelligence. That's just saying, what do we have that's good? Let's share it with each other. Co-branding. Pacifica has virtually no name recognition. The individual stations have name recognition. People in their signal areas may know their station, but they don't even know it's a Pacifica station. And that doesn't happen with other networks. You know what network you're listening to, not just what station you're listening to. So that identification. Fulfilling premiums in a timely fashion, having a system of auditing the premiums to make sure that indeed premiums have been ordered shortly after fund drive, that they've been paid for, that stations aren't using the float, as it were. There's no float. That's a bill. You need to go pay for your premiums, and they have to be shipped to the public in a timely fashion. So addressing all of those structural issues. When I took over this position a few months into the job, our corporate status got suspended because for the 7 preceding years before I became the executive director, a necessary tax document had not been filed with the state of California. And so however many notices had come to that office saying, you guys need to file this document, nothing had happened until I took over. And our corporate status got suspended. And we fixed that and, put it back into compliance and had to make a name change to deal with all of this. And things like that, structural deficits that have gone on for years on end that have to be addressed. And then never mind, there are board issues and things to do with functionality and whether the board structure is serving the integrity of the organization as a radio and media entity whose purpose is to put out good programming content. So are the people that are involved with it, are they engaged in that, or are they engaged in whatever fractious internal debates are going on, rather than focusing outward towards the listening audience, which, the public, that's who we serve. That's why we exist. There's no reason to have a radio station if you're not putting out program content to serve the public, and particularly public radio or community radio, however you wish to categorize it. The raison d'etre, the reason we are here is to serve the public interest, which means that's what our focus has to be, not, inward, but outward towards the larger community. And is this serving that goal? Is it informing people about what's going on in the world? Is it stimulating debate and dialogue and thought? And, I think I believe most of the people that become involved with Pacifica do so well-intentioned, and they believe in doing these things, but they may see them entirely differently. And it's accepting other people's realities, that your reality doesn't have to be the only right reality. There can be several different ways of looking at a problem, all of which have value. And there's value in the discussion that goes on between people as to what is the best way to approach a problem. And that's what it means to have open dialogue. And our purpose as a media outlet isn't to propagandize and tell people to think one specific thing. It's to make them think. It is to give them information so that they can make informed decisions on their own, using their own faculties, rather than just believing, oh, so-and-so told me this. No, give me the information, and then I can, think about what I think the right answer is to this problem. And so I feel that as we sort of address the business side of the structural problems of running a radio network, a large $13 to $14 million a year organization with hundreds of paid employees and thousands of volunteers, and presenting good content on the air. So you have to balance, who we are philosophically with how do you make that work functionally in, a world that runs on money and regulations.
Wow. So we're going into we're starting a fund drive in February.
I know, I'm so sorry.
And we have been having more and more fund drives and more repeat hours, like with Christine, who can't stand it.
Well, because she doesn't choose to be put on the air 8 hours in a day. So, yes, I know.
And we're just sort of walking into the same thing next week.
Well, I hope that we will change some of those dynamics. Each station has its own challenges. This station, I'm afraid, has suffered from a certain amount of neglect in things like fund drive planning and coordination. When I brought on the new interim general manager, and we had 2 staff meetings in 2 days, and when he asked things like, who's on your fund drive committee? And how often do you have staff meetings? That's exactly the reaction we got from all of staff. They laughed. What fund drive committee? What staff meetings? We don't have staff meetings. We don't have department head meetings. We don't have a fund drive committee. Well, those things are going to change now. He started reaching out immediately to people to say, okay, so, what are your thoughts on this? How are we going to plan that? When are we having a meeting? Tomorrow we're having a fund drive meeting with staff so we can plan a drive. You can't simply go into a drive without, Plan, yes. Well, I have to tell you, last year, at the beginning of the year, when I asked all the general managers in the network, send me your schedule for the year of all of your fund drives, your start and end dates and your goals, I encountered a reaction that was like, what? Plan for the year? Okay. And then I have to remind everybody again this year, it's January. I'd like your plans for the year. It's changing the cultural perception about what is normal. What is normal in an organization? Is it normal to simply walk into something and say, okay, so we're going to raise $1 million. We're going to throw stuff at the wall until something sticks. No, you go into it and you say, okay. And it's one of the things I want to address. I had a long meeting with our subscriptions department today. It's not, again, functional nor fair to have so many premiums that you can't manage to deal with them, nor do half of them work. So you need to go into a drive. And we've become very premium driven. People should be supporting the radio station because they support the radio station, not because I like that product I'm going to get as a gift. And when you go into this place where you're constantly on the air and you're pushing more stuff because you need to raise more money, it's antithetical to the idea of having listener support because you actually are subscribing to a station whose programming you appreciate and that you feel it's worth paying for to keep it on the air. And it's part of what has to change. If you have programs on in prime time that can't generate listener support, that means people aren't supporting the station. If they don't like the show and they're not willing to pledge during during that program,
they're not there.
then you have to consider why that's happening. And if you look at our data, I mean, we're flatlined in so many places that clearly that has to be addressed. And it's not because we don't have quality programming. We have quite a lot of really good programming. But what hours do you put it on? Is it in the right placement? Does it flow well to the next hour? Is it giving listeners what they expect to hear in certain parts of the day? You know, there are certain expectations in morning and afternoon drive which differ from what you're going to listen to, for instance, in the middle of the night, when you're going to listen to something much more long form, when you have time to think philosophically. In the daytime, you want to know what happened that day and can I get home? You know, there are many different things that you want to know if you're driving around in a city like Los Angeles. So I think all of that has to be addressed. And then you have things such as outreach. I've always said the whole time I've been here, you can't talk into a paper bag and like wonder why nobody's hearing you. If we only talk to ourselves, the people that are already listening are already listening. Other radio stations tell new people that they exist, that there's something worth tuning into. Hey, we've got this show over here. Here's this lineup in drive time. Those are necessary components to having a successful media outlet. I mean, it's just what everyone else in the industry does, and it's part of what we need to do as well so that we reach new listeners and bring in, you know, I mean, we have this discussion of, you know, generation gaps, but we don't, in fact, we're not very successfully bringing in a lot of younger listeners. And it's not because it's youth over age, it's just basic numbers that you have to bring in new people and, you know, successive waves of them in order to stay operational. And that's something throughout the network that we have to address. I mean, we're having some really good stuff going on in New York. I hired a new interim program director out there who is a seasoned investigative journalist who has excellent access, who knows radio, who's very professional. And so
knows radio?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. What a concept, right? And, you know, and so in addition to being the PD, he's doing the morning show with our longtime announcer in New York, Michael G. Haskins. And the gentleman I'm talking about is Bob Henley. But he's been bringing on, you know, politicians, union officials, people talking about what's going on in the city, what's happening in New York, what's happening in New Jersey, you know, what is going on that might be important. And then cross-pollinating shows from other time slots, bringing people on to say, hey, what's on your show tomorrow? Oh, you're going to be interviewing so-and-so. That's cool. And this is having such a salutary effect because it's not just putting people on in the morning where they'll be heard by a different audience, but the idea that we are a cohesive whole, that the person that does that is going to reach out to you and figure out what's going to make your show better and how to, you know, I've seen stuff where it's like, oh, you know, hey, the sound quality on that wasn't that good. And then the person writes back and says, well, thank you. Nobody ever showed me how to use the equipment. I'd love to sound better, you know? Like, we're an organization where, you know, 95% of the programming is produced by volunteers, you know? If you don't adequately train those people, they may have great ideas, but poor execution because they don't necessarily have the knowledge to, you know, make it sound good, to have good production values. Because, I mean, this is a medium, it's an entertainment medium. I mean, if it sounds awful, people go someplace else. So content is one thing. How you present that content is another. Did it sound like good radio? I mean, that's the first thing I said to someone when I was talking last year about what was going on in New York. And it was like, oh, so do you want to change the programming? I'm like, no, the first place to start is, did that sound like good radio? And if it didn't sound like good radio, let's start there and work our way out from there. So there are a lot of things like that. And having people with, you know, with passion for what they do, who enjoy being in this business, who like to do radio, you know, I mean, if you want to sell shoes, go sell shoes. But if you want to be in radio, you should be in radio because you actually think this is something really cool to do. Because this is something really cool to do. And some people feel that way about it. And that's like should be the attitude of everyone that's involved with it.
But radio's dead and everybody's going to the internet, isn't that?
Well, radio isn't dead. And lots of people are going to the internet, but we also should be going to the internet. That's one of the things I want to do this year if we are able to with our resources, which have to go many places, but it's time that Pacifica launched, 2 internet radio stations, real internet radio stations, not just websites, internet radio stations, you know, the progressive Pandora, where you actually feed in all 5 stations programming, you feed in the affiliates, and you let people pick, you know, that's how people are used to it. See, it's okay. It's like Walmart changed logistics, right? It used to be in manufacturing and retail. The retailer told the manufacturer, I want this many units of X. Now the manufacturer tells the retailer, I'm sending you this many units of X. It's a completely different dynamic in the power basis of the relationship. It's very similar in what's going on with media. The younger generation, but people who are being brought up on what's going on with the internet have the expectation of having it their way. They don't want to listen to something they don't want to listen to. They want to program a station that only plays what I want to hear. And it's dinosaur behavior to think that we can stick only with what we want to feed the public rather than giving the public what it wants to hear. And what the public wants to hear is exactly what each individual person wants to hear. Each person wants his or her own individual radio station where they can say, and that's what I'd like to see us do, where you can actually put in your preferences. I'm interested in environmentalism, animal rights, feminism, whatever, and we make a bunch of program suggestions. Well, you might like this program from KPFK and this one from KPFA, and boom, you've got your own Pacifica radio station. And we can do the same thing in Spanish as well. And this is where it's going. It is going to digital. It is going to the place where you can select what it is you want to hear when you want to hear it. And Pacifica completely needs to go there. And it doesn't negate the power of broadcast radio. This is still an incredibly powerful medium. But we're a media organization. If you look at our mission statement, obviously we are supposed to branch out when the next technological development occurs.
When in trouble, expand.
Exactly, Roy, exactly. If you don't cast your nets out there, you're not going to bring anything in. And I've said this over and over again. I can make cuts in New York and bring us down $1 million in expenses like instantly. You cannot cut yourself to solvency. You cannot cut yourself to success. And you will cut yourself to death if you don't do anything to expand your listenership, expand your base, and bring people in and raise the level of enthusiasm and love for the station. And that has to come from people feeling good about it. It has to come from people feeling like this is my place. And that's part of it, is a sense of ownership that the listeners feel. And we have people have a sense of entitlement, but I'm talking about a sense of ownership on the part of the listeners where it's like, this is my radio station and I care about it. And it's an important institution for me socially and publicly that this continue to exist because I obtain value from what I'm getting from this institution. And we have a lot of valuable programming on the air, but it's about, getting it to the ears that want to hear it. So,
this is KPFK Los Angeles. We are on the air live with the executive director of Pacifica, Summer Reese, who is has consented to come down and talk with us at 12 o'clock, which is when I'm on. I invited Summer to come on, and I got one complaint already that you're, I said, Summer's going to be on my show. And, well, I'm a working person. I can't listen to 12 o'clock. Summer should come on when I'm in.
Well, thank you, Roy, but you're the only one that ever invites me on the air at KPFK. So it may be at midnight, but that's when I'm welcome here, which says whatever it says. But I think I have been asked, I've done several reports to listeners in New York City because of all the dramatic changes that have gone on there, and I've felt necessary to speak to the audience and tell them what's happening on more than one occasion. And I'm hoping we're going to work towards having a monthly report to the listener across the network, because many people have asked me to do that because, I supply written reports to the National Board of Directors with multiple attachments about everything that's going on in the network. But I'm afraid they know far more of what's actually happening than, say, is known kind of at the local level and certainly by the listeners. So I'm hopeful that maybe that would help to, A, dispel any misconceptions that people have, because rumors seem to run rampant and you have to correct those things, and also let people know what's going on. You see, a lot of it really isn't, let's face it, an executive director's job is to run a business. That's your job, It's not the sexy part of the job either. It's all the nuts and bolts part of the job. Employee matters, legal matters, contractual matters, regulatory matters, compliance matters, money matters. That's my job. Programming is something that has to get handled at the local level, but obviously it's a network, so one also has to think about that. What would make for a better network and what would maximize the programming potential that we have, considering we have incredibly powerful signals. We have the instruments, let's play something on them, and let's share the good stuff with each other, and be intelligent about how we do that. So,
Richard Parotski.
Yes.
He's our new interim general manager at KPFK.
Yes.
He is outgoing interim general manager at KPFA.
Yes.
What is it that recommended him to you that you made that appointment, right?
Yes. Well, I, having been a co-chair of, I believe, 2 of our general manager search committees here at KPFK, and having gone through hundreds of resumes and dozens of interviews over the years that I've served here in terms of hiring managers. I like to hire people who know what they're doing and have some experience doing it. With Mr. Parotski, he's been a finalist in multiple general manager pools around the network, and in fact, in the executive director pool in the search that hired my predecessor. So I felt he came highly recommended and had been extraordinarily well vetted by Pacifica, and he has extremely extensive media experience. He's been a media manager for 30 years. He's managed other radio stations, and on every level, he had the level of expertise, management experience, and certainly selection where he had been repeatedly selected by Pacificans to run a station or run the entire network. So I frankly felt, he couldn't come more highly recommended. And of course, I'd interviewed him before on one of those GM committees. So it wasn't like I didn't know who, it wasn't like I hadn't already been through this process. And frankly, when you go through these processes, the number of people who are actually qualified to apply for these jobs is rather limited, between the fact that we pay not fantastically for the industry we're in. We do not necessarily enjoy a fantastic professional reputation amongst people in the industry, to put it mildly. I'm being polite. We are an extraordinarily difficult organization in many, many ways in terms of our diffuse structure. So it takes people of, truly impeccable management quality to be able to perform well in our organization. And I picked him, it must be, I want to say 10 months ago, to be the interim general manager at KPFK, and he's done a stellar job there. Effectively and dispassionately addressed many problems, has, I think, enjoyed the respect of what we would call both factions, because he's not factional. He's, he's a professional manager, and so he addresses things professionally and, deals with problems as they arise in an appropriate manner, and has even broached subjects as complicated and controversial as programming changes at KPFK, but done in an open, collaborative manner that has caused a tremendous dialogue amongst programmers up there and amongst board members and staff members as to what works in what hours. Not getting rid of programming, but shifting it and creating that dialogue of, if something doesn't work in this hour, well, you need to put it in an hour where your audience is available to you. So when Bernard Duncan, tendered his resignation to me, I already have a pool of candidates for the permanent manager position at KPFK, and so that will be shortly permanently staffed. And so it was an easy and immediate decision in terms of what would make sense for managing this station here in the interim until we, make a permanent pool, even start the hiring process for a permanent manager here. And for this short period of time during the overlap, he's managing both stations and coordinating the schedules of our two California stations for the fund drive. And that in and of itself has, many possibilities for, efficiencies and economies of scale and all those wonderful business terms. But truly, to coordinate things so that you don't have redundancy where, you can make basically two stations can enjoy some of the benefit of, sometimes one person's work. And that's good for us. And it's something I'm trying to do across the network. I believe in us functioning as a network, that we maximize what we do by doing it collaboratively. And it shouldn't be a threat to people's local autonomy or what they want to do programmatically. You simply function better as a business when you look at those areas where you should be working collaboratively and at a network level. And at least in this case, we can do some of that for the two California stations until we're able to do it for the entire network.